Hi, my name is LJ Harry, and I am here to tell you about storytelling. This summer, my family and I visited the St. Louis Science Center. We're newbies here, so we wanted to take it all in. We walked into the large lobby, and the gentleman asked us what we were there to see. We wanted to see everything, but we didn't have the money or the time to see everything. So kind of like choosing meals on a menu, we picked out a few exhibits. We chose the planetarium and the T-Rex exhibit. Unfortunately, the planetarium was opening up in just a few moments, and we only had a few moments walk to get there. So my blood pressure rose to an unhealthy high, and we looked like a family about to miss a flight as we speedily walked through the St. Louis Science Center. We walked through the crowds of people until we got there. And we got there, I asked the attendant, I was out of breath. I said, hey, did we make it? And she nodded. Our blood pressure returned to a healthy level, and we calmly walked inside like we had done this before. We're just old pros now. The planetarium offered seats, of course, but it also offered mats so you could lie down and look up at the stars. This was going to be exciting, and this was going to be fun. And it was, until it wasn't. The young lady with a microphone explained that the sun marched across the sky until it disappeared into the west, and then she scientifically explained the planets and why Pluto was no longer a planet. Sorry, Pluto. She explained the asteroid belt and then the scientific definitions of the Kuiper belt, and for 45 grueling minutes, she shot facts at us rapid fire, and I fell asleep on the mat on the floor. She lost me. When she turned on the lights, it was time to leave the solar system, and we headed for the T-Rex exhibit. If it was anything like we just saw, I'm in for a second nap. But it wasn't like anything we just saw. It was fascinating. But it wasn't fascinating because it was rapid-fire facts about the Tyrannosaurus Rex, its height, its weight, its menu choices. It was fascinating because the whole presentation centered around a story of 3 boys who went digging in North Dakota and came across the bones of what they thought was a dinosaur. They called somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody who called somebody who was a doctor of paleontology. And when they were finished brushing off the bones, they discovered they had unearthed the bones of a teenage T-Rex. I couldn't fall asleep if I wanted to, partly because of my nap at the planetarium, but also because the story was so interesting, so engaging. And that is the power of story. Story engages an audience in a way rapid-fire facts just cannot. Story draws us in. Story causes us to want to keep turning the pages or sit on the edge of our seat to hear what happens next. Stories have to be told. And storytellers got to tell them. The greatest story ever told has to be told. And storytellers get to tell the stories. And the greatest story we get to tell is his story. The big question is storytelling a gift you are born with, or is it a skill you can hone and craft? And the answer to that is yes. It's likely a gift you are born with, and it is also a skill you can hone and craft, which is good news for anybody who feels like they're not a good storyteller but wants to be. The good news is you and we can get better. When I was at Gateway College, the lovely Andrea Johnson was a freshman. I was getting ready to be a junior. And I told my friend Luke when I met her the first night I saw her, I said, I'm going to marry that girl right there. And I pointed right at her. And by the grace of God, and by his grace and by her mercy, we just celebrated our silver anniversary in August. Andrea is a wonderfully skilled keyboard player. She amazes me at how well she can play. She can hear a song and then she can play it. But she learned how to play by ear. She didn't know all of the ins and outs of music theory. So Gateway College taught her the theory that made the music sound so good. Kind of taught her the whys for all the whats. This session is designed to do that. It's going to look under the hood of storytelling. We're going to look at the theory of storytelling to see what makes a good storyteller, so we can do that. And we're going to look at those things that, well, let's just say, makes a storyteller not a good storyteller, so we cannot do that. When it's time to tell your story, are you telling your story or somebody else's story? Those are really the only 2 options. I've been in services before, doubtless you have too, where people were, preacher or teacher was telling their story or telling a story, and then they apologized. They said, forgive the personal reference here. But no, there's no need to apology. Those are the best stories. Nobody can tell a story about you like you can tell the story about you. I could find somebody else's story in the classic. I had this book when I was in college. It was about that thick, the Encyclopedia of 7,700 Illustrations, or now from our new technological friend, ChatGPT. But nobody can tell about the story when your mother showed up at the airport dressed like a reindeer at Christmas time to meet her one day to be daughter-in-law for the first time. That's my story. Don't be afraid to tell your story. You were there. But beware of two dangers when you're telling a story about you. You can fall off the tightrope on one of two sides, either bragging about yourself or embarrassing yourself. I heard a young preacher one time say, I was coming out of a 3-hour prayer meeting during my 14-day fast. Now that's what the kids call a humble brag. Don't do that. When you're telling your story, don't brag on yourself. But the second danger is embarrassing yourself. Now, self-deprecating humor is probably some of the funniest humor, and it can really help to tear down walls between you and your audience because it lets them know you are a person, not only a preacher, but it's kind of like Yoo-hoo. It is best in small doses. The lovely Andrea asked me to remodel the kitchen when we lived in Ohio. Our kitchen was pretty dated. The house was built about 50 years ago, and she was hoping for a refresh, but we did not have an unlimited budget. Otherwise, we just would have hired the work out. And she knows me. Like I mentioned, we've been married for 25 years. She knows I'm much better with a keyboard that's a computer keyboard. She's better at the music keyboard than I am with a circular saw. But I told her I'll try. I'll give it my best. Now, this was my chance to be her hero. Lowe's had delivered the countertop. I took it into the garage. I measured it for the cutout for the sink. I made the cut. I brought in the left side of the countertop. I set it down on the cabinet, and it was perfect. I was pretty proud of my work. I might take a picture of it and send it to Chip Gaines, but I still had the right side to go. I measured the right side of the sink. I went back out to the garage. I made my marks on the countertop. I fastened the countertop to the sawhorses. I grabbed my circular saw that I had just used to do it right the first time. I cut out the notch for the sink and I carried it back inside. And as I was lowering the right side of the countertop onto the cabinets, I yelled, "Oh no!" And from the other side of the house, Andrea said, "What's wrong?" I had made the cut on the wrong side of the countertop. Now there's a notch where there should not be, and there's no notch where there should be. Most of my DIY projects are DIY. Now that's somewhat safe, self-deprecating humor, where you can make fun of yourself a little bit. But if I told a story about everything I try is a failure and I can't do anything right, and I might as well just sell all my tools to somebody who can do something right and make something right for a change, well, I've just stepped off the tightrope from self-deprecating humor into embarrassing myself and maybe even making the audience feel just a little bit awkward, like I need therapy. I love how somebody said it. When we communicate, the audience needs to know more about him than about us. That's really why we tell stories, is so we can get to the place where we can tell his story. Now, speaking of embarrassing people when you're speaking, never embarrass somebody in a story. Maybe you and your spouse had a fight on your way to church, or your kids failed a class in school. Don't tell those stories. Your family, your friends need to know they are safe when you are speaking, when you're telling a story. It might be about them, but it will not embarrass them. If you're teaching or preaching about Judas, for example, and you're using somebody for an example, and the church knows Robert is headed to court for an embezzlement charge, don't use Robert for Judas. That's just a little too on the nose. Choose somebody else. Don't embarrass anybody, and even get their permission ahead of time so you don't embarrass them in your story. Think of some of the most memorable stories you remember whenever somebody was preaching or teaching. What made those stories so memorable? Well, most likely, they were personal. They may have been illustrations out of a book or may have been illustrations from online, but most likely the really memorable ones are the ones where they were personal and they were picturesque. You were there. As I was telling you the story of cutting the countertop in my garage, I really wanted you to see yourself sitting in the garage. And when you're sitting there, what do you hear What are you seeing? What do you smell? I wanted you to hear the sound of the saw. I wanted you to smell the sawdust. I wanted you to see me sweat because, yeah, it was hot, but because I really don't know what I'm doing. I wanted you to follow me in from the garage into the kitchen as I lay down the left side of the countertop, and I felt pretty good about myself. And then I wanted you to follow me back in as I lay down the right side of the countertop, and I wanted you to hear me yell, "Oh no!" That's how we want to tell stories. Tell them with as much description and detail as we can without going over the top. It's what editors and writers call purple prose, P-R-O-S-E. This is purple prose. The 9-foot-tall giant stood straight as the 10-pound sword glistened in the bright yellow noonday sun. The bronzed head of the sharpened spear shooting the sun's rays in the dark brown eyes of the 5-foot-tall, red-headed shepherd boy in the dark tan tunic as he slung the leather sling around his curly hair 3 or 4 times. That's way too much. That's called purple prose. As a storyteller, we want our audience to sit there just outside an open tent flap of one of the soldiers in the valley of Elah, but they don't have to know the color of David's tunic or how many times he spun the sling. If the descriptions distract more than they attract the audience's attention, it's probably purple prose. Get ready to cut some of those adjectives or adverbs to simplify your story. As you are painting the picture with your words, take a seat and look around you. You're in the valley of Elah. You're among the camp of Israel and their soldiers. What do you see? What do you smell? What do you hear? What do you feel? Put yourself there, and as the storyteller, as you work through what you see and what you smell and what you hear and what you feel, when you are telling the story to your audience, you can help them to sit right there as well, and they will see and hear and smell and feel the same thing. As a storyteller, one of the greatest compliments you can hear is, man, when you were speaking, when you were telling that story, I felt like I was right there. Jesus did that perfectly. A certain man had 2 sons, and the younger son came to him and said, "Dad, I don't want to wait any longer. I want what's coming to me whenever you die, but I want it now." Now stop the story. We're inside the house. It's breakfast time. What do you see? We see a hurt, disappointed, maybe even frustrated, angry father. We see a greedy, immature, insensitive younger son. What else do we see? We probably see a surprised older son standing over in the corner, arms folded, shaking his head. How dare he? Who does he think he is? If anybody's going to get anything, it's going to be me. I'm the firstborn. And then later when the friends and the money are gone and we sit right next to him in the mud and slop of a pig pen far from home and even farther from his father. We can't believe where we are. He's a Jew. He's not supposed to be hanging around pigs. Now what do you see? You see a tattered tunic caked in mud and slop. We see pigs wrestling what little food he can forage out of his hands for them. What do you hear? We hear pigs squealing, and we see them wallow in the mud, and we can smell swine exhaust. We hear him lament. We hear him repent. Now follow him all the many miles from the pig pen to the family farm. Walk right behind him as you get close to the house. What do you see? We see dust stir up in the distance. What do you hear? We hear him rehearsing his apology, and then we hear his father calling his name. "Junior, is that you? Junior?" Now what do you see? We see father running from the front porch down the driveway, making a beeline for his younger, disrespectful, immature, insensitive son. What do you feel? At first we feel fear. What if his father wants nothing to do with him? What if his father wants to disown him? What if his father reports him to the authorities and town elders for shaming his family's good name and has every right to do so? And then his father gets closer. Now what do you see? We see a winded father outrun all the younger servants and wrap his arms around his son and kiss him. And for the first time in a long time, since we've been with Junior this whole time, we feel safe. That's what Jesus did. He was the master storyteller. He was a master artist, painting pictures with his words. As storytellers, we are called to do the same. Well, sometimes adding elements that the audience knows don't fit help to tell the story a little more interesting. For example, have David DoorDash lunch to his brothers when he hears Goliath's voice for the first time. You might have a fact checker in the audience call you out on it. Actually, DoorDash didn't come about until 2004. But it is a creative way to bridge our day with the Bible's day without changing the overall story. Many times we don't really understand the Bible's day. Many times they lived in tents and were nomadic and wore robes and tunic, and they wrote on papyrus, and we write on smartphones. It's very different in our day. So just to bring in something which is called anachronistic, which just means out of time, to bring it into their day kind of helps to change that a little bit, make it feel a little more relatable. It's okay for the disciples to have social media. That way, whenever Jesus tells them Lazarus is asleep, they can tell Jesus, well, that doesn't make any sense because we saw on Facebook that his family said he was going to die. They even asked us to pray. They even used a little praying hands emoji. Anachronistic, out of that time period. It's a fun $5 word, won't fit in Scrabble, but it just means portraying something that's from a different time. It is a great feature to use, especially with a younger audience, but much like purple prose, be very careful overusing it or it'll lose its effect. And speaking of features or ingredients to a good story, a storyteller known as Matthew Dix shares a few interesting features storytellers use to help make the stories more engaging. He uses a process called and, but, therefore. Basically, it means here's what was happening, but there was conflict, therefore we resolved it. So that's his process. And the first is called the elephant. That's kind of the, oh no, what are we going to do? That's the, oh boy. That's what everybody can see. A problem we're trying to solve. Conflict we're trying to resolve. And the story about the countertop in the garage. The problem was remodeling the kitchen on a shoestring budget with a husband who's more likely to be Chip Gaines' web designer than apprentice. Even in that short story, the elephant stands large in the garage. And that is, we don't have a lot of money. I don't have a lot of experience, but there's a lot of expectation for me to get this right. Next comes the backpack. That's where we load up the audience with the stakes, not like red meat steaks, but the stakes that are on the line. What is on the line here? Well, in that story, my wife wanted me to remodel the kitchen countertop, and I wanted to be my wife's hero. Everything was on the line. My respect from her was on the line, or so I felt. The money we had spent on the countertop was on the line. We had spent a lot of money, and the time we had spent waiting for it to be custom made and delivered, all that was on the line. If I don't get this right, we wasted a lot of time and a lot of money. Now, in the grand scheme, it doesn't really matter, but to our family, it does matter. And I want the audience to feel that there's a lot on the line. It's what Matthew Dix calls the backpack. Another feature is called the breadcrumbs. They're designed to lead the audience to what they think will happen, but it might not. In my story here with the breadcrumbs, I brought in the left side of the countertop. It was perfect. I was pretty proud of myself. May even take a picture and send it to Chip Gaines. But I still had the right side to go. The breadcrumbs let the audience know I got it right once, but will I get it right the second time? Remember, the backpack. What are you carrying around? You're carrying around the stakes, that these stakes are still high. A lot of time, a lot of money, a little budget, and a hopeful husband that I can be my wife's hero. Those breadcrumbs keep the audience engaged in guessing what's going to happen. Now, this is another feature that's fun in storytelling. It is suspending a story. I could finish that story right away, but what if suspending the story keeps the audience more engaged? Remember, we're not just telling our story to tell our story. We're telling ours to point to His. Our story, our illustration, they're not the story. They are just the appetizer that point to the entree. I shared some of this content in a book called Full Youth Ministry in a chapter called Clear Communication. And I've heard Brother Bernard say before, if you want more information about this, then read my book. And he names the title of the book. I've always wanted to say that, so now I kind of can. You can read more about this in Clear Communication in Full Youth Ministry. Our stories are the light that shine on his story. We're simply building a bridge from our day to their day with the stories we tell. So if I open up a message or a lesson with this story about the countertop in the garage, what might this story lead to? Or what lesson, what message might it be setting up for? Could be a lot of them. Could be a lesson on Noah building the ark without blueprints or IKEA instructions. There's anachronistic again. Or it could be a story about building the tabernacle or the temple, or a story about building the wise and the foolish builder of Matthew 7. Or maybe even a story on Jesus building the church, Matthew 16. That opening story, whatever you open with, needs to be an appetizer that we serve the audience before we serve up the main course. It's a way of saying, if you liked that, you're going to love this. And crafting a message in its entirety, crafting a lesson in its entirety, that's a different seminar for another time. But stories in a message or a lesson, they typically make their appearance in one of three places, or sometimes in all three places. The opening, the closing, and what the beloved Pastor Tim Dugas used to say or call a commercial. A commercial is usually a short story just before we get ready to close to draw the audience's attention back. Maybe they were at Raising Cane's in their minds because we've been dealing with Genesis or 2nd Timothy for several minutes, but that commercial can kind of snap them back from 1500 BC, bring them into our day again, can draw their attention back to today and help us apply what we've been teaching or preaching, get their attention right before we close the message and open up the altar. And I used two of these features in a message before I got ready to close. One time I was preaching about the coming of the Lord, that Jesus is coming back one of these days. And I had been in Matthew 24 for a little while and 1 Thessalonians 4, of course. But right before I closed the message and I opened the altar, I shared a short commercial about a time my wife, our itty-bitty daughter, McKenna, and I were flying to Arkansas for a youth camp. We were traveling together. We had checked our bags, breezed through security, headed for the gate. We settled into those vinyl chairs in the concourse, and we waited for the plane to take off. But as we waited the minutes and even hours away, we started to get hungry. But we were at a little bit of a problem. Here's an elephant. Our plane was about to board, but now we were hungry. During all that waiting, we realized we're not going to eat for another 2 hours, maybe more. And let's be honest, 2 bags of dry roasted peanuts and a couple cans of cranapple, that's not enough for a family of 3. But I remembered we had passed a Wolfgang Puck bistro on the way to the gate. So I went ahead and sent Andrea and McKenna on the plane, and I went to get pizza for all of us. Now, our daughter was extremely little, so we had priority boarding so she could get on there. We had plenty of time, I thought. I got to Wolfgang Puck. I placed our order. I paid handsomely for a small pizza. I don't know if they know how much that stuff costs outside the airport, but not that much. And then I sat at the counter and I watched as one pizza after another went into the oven. And at first I was okay. It was a nice break. It was a good break from those vinyl chairs. And I had plenty of time to join my family on the plane. I watched them put a pizza in the oven. It had far too many toppings for my taste or my wallet. Could not be ours. No problem. We still have about 20 minutes. Another pizza came out. Another went in. Still not ours. No problem. 15 minutes. Another went out. Another went in. Not ours. Now I'm starting to get a little nervous. I've got under 10 minutes and our pizza that I've paid for has not yet begun to bake. And from where I sat, I could see the gate just a ways down the concourse, and I could see another passenger hang after another passenger hand over their boarding pass and disappear down the jetway. And I could see very clearly the gate area was thinning out. Checked my watch. My time was running out. And I kept watching the Wolfgang worker toss pizzas into the oven until finally I looked and I saw sausage and mushroom. That's the one I ordered. And at that time, I've got 5 minutes before the plane departs, not boards, leaves. Our pizza, based on all the market research I had done while sitting there, would take every one of those precious 300 seconds to bake, maybe more. And then I started hearing those ominous,
"Final boarding call for Delta Flight 6120 with service to Memphis on the Little Rock. Report to gate C52 immediately. Your plane is due to depart."
And then I feared what I feared and heard what I feared I would hear.
"Attention in the terminal. Delta is paging Little Rock passenger Lloyd Harry Jr. Report to gate C52. Your plane is leaving now."
That's when I have a decision to make. I could wait at the counter, hope our mushroom and sausage masterpiece was quicker than the rest, And I could run to the plane a conquering hero with a piping pizza in my hands. Or I could count it a loss and explain to Andrea why I spent our $15, 30 minutes, and I got nothing out of it. But if I waited at the counter, I could miss the flight and I'd eat my pizza alone in the terminal as I watched the plane take off and take my wife and daughter into the air and into Arkansas without me. But if I head back to the plane without the pizza, well, we're still hungry, out $15 and frustrated, especially when they bring the dry roasted peanuts around. What is a daddy and a hubby to do? You could cut the suspense with a pizza cutter. That's when I threw in the second feature of that story in that commercial, the suspense. I suspended the story and I wrapped up my message, leaving the audience wondering, what did I do? They expected me to resolve the conflict. They wanted me to resolve the conflict, but it was more effective in that moment to leave it unresolved. And I pointed out in the message that on that day, there will be no final boarding call. When Jesus returns, he will come as a thief in the night. So let's take a look. Let's do a little case study. Let's look at what we've reviewed so far. We talked about the elephant, the backpack, and the breadcrumbs. In this story, what was the elephant? The elephant was, we have a flight to catch, but we're hungry and running out of time. Am I going to make the flight or miss it? What's the backpack? Andrea's hoping I could get us lunch. I'm hoping I could get us lunch and get back on time to hit the plane. What are the breadcrumbs? Well, our pizza went in the oven almost exactly 5 minutes before the plane is due to depart, and there's no way I can make it to the gate before the agent shuts the door. This will not work. And then the fourth feature or ingredient of that story was suspense. Suspending the story to resolve it later to keep the audience's attention. All of us have stories, and we need to tell them. It really is the best way to tell his story. So starting today, keep a journal of stories of little things, big things. They don't have to be huge, but just little things that happen to you throughout your life. Those stories will help make great openers, or great closers, or great commercials for some of your messages and lessons. If you don't fancy yourself a storyteller, and that's why you're watching this session, then read books of great storytellers and see how they tell the story and look for those features in their stories. Or listen to podcasts of great storytellers. Some of our preachers and teachers are fantastic storytellers. Listen to those messages in those lessons and listen to how they craft a story, how they tell it, how they put you right there in the action, in the scene in Scripture. And you can see and hear and smell and feel what is happening in the Scripture. You'll be able to pick up on some of those ingredients, some of those features, some of those techniques, some of those tips. And as you learn and listen and watch, you will find yourself being a better storyteller as you tell his story through story. Okay, I'll answer the question. In case you're wondering, I waited at the counter. I picked up our pizza. I sprinted to the gate and I got there just before the agent shut the door. And our family enjoyed Wolfgang Puck Pizza at 30,000 feet. Thank you for allowing me to share with you the art of storytelling.